He took 8 stabs for an alien child, then woke up to find elite alien soldiers at his doorstep. The rain hammered against the cracked pavement as Daniel Carter stumbled through the alley, clutching his bleeding side with trembling hands, and every step sent waves of agony through his body. But he kept moving because somewhere behind him a small voice was crying, and he could not leave that sound unanswered. 3 days earlier, Daniel had been nothing more than a warehouse worker in the industrial district of New Seattle, going through the motions of an ordinary life and hauling boxes and counting inventory and dreaming of a better tomorrow. But everything changed when the ships arrived, and not the sleek exploration vessels from the stories, but massive warships that tore through the atmosphere like falling stars. The Calirian Empire had come to Earth, and they came with chains. Daniel learned quickly that not all aliens were conquerors, because the Calirians brought with them their servants, and their laborers, and their unwanted, and among them were the small fragile beings called the Sylvani, who had been conquered 2 generations prior, and now served as slaves to their masters. He first saw the child in the processing center where humans and aliens alike were being cataloged for work assignments, and she was tiny with luminous silver skin and eyes like liquid mercury, and she trembled as a Calirian overseer yanked her by the arm and barked orders in a language that sounded like breaking glass. Something in Daniel broke at that moment, because he had always believed that strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. And this child was barely 4 feet tall, and her wrists were so thin, they looked like they might snap under the overseer's grip. So he stepped forward and he spoke up, and he demanded that the overseer release her. The Calirian turned slowly, and its 4 eyes fixed on Daniel with the kind of cold amusement that predators reserve for prey that does not understand its place in the food chain, and it released the child only to strike Daniel across the face with the back of its scaled hand, and the blow sent him sprawling to the floor and blood filled his mouth. But Daniel got back up, because that was what humans did, and they got back up. The overseer seemed surprised by this, and it studied Daniel with newfound interest before dismissing him with a wave and returning to its duties. And the child, whose name Daniel would later learn was Kira, looked at him with wide eyes that held something he could not quite name. Over the following days, Daniel saw Kira often in the workyards where humans and Sylvani labored side by side under the watchful gaze of Calirian guards, and she was always alone and always frightened, and Daniel made it his mission to watch over her when he could, and sharing his meager rations and offering small smiles that seemed to ease the terror in her eyes. The other humans noticed, and some called him foolish for risking himself over an alien child, but others understood, because humanity had always possessed this strange impulse to protect the innocent, regardless of where they came from. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel was walking home through the empty streets when he heard the scream, and it was high-pitched and desperate, and it came from an alley 2 blocks away, and he ran without thinking because his legs were already moving before his brain caught up. He found Kira backed against a wall, and 3 Calirian youths loomed over her, and they were laughing, as one of them held a long, jagged blade, and they were not there to kill her quickly, but to make her suffer, because cruelty was a form of entertainment for those who believed themselves superior. Daniel did not hesitate, and he charged. The first Calirian turned just in time to take Daniel's shoulder to its midsection, and they went down in a tangle of limbs, and the other 2 reacted with surprising speed, because they were trained warriors even in their youth, and Daniel was just a human with nothing but rage and determination. The blade came fast, and it sank into his shoulder, and then his ribs, and then his stomach, and Daniel felt each one like ice and fire combined. But he did not stop, and he grabbed the nearest Calirian by the throat and slammed its head against the pavement, and he took another stab to the back and then another to his leg. Somewhere in the chaos, Kira was screaming for him to run, but Daniel could not run, because if he did, she would die. The 5th stab pierced his lung, and the 6th opened a gash across his chest, and the 7th nearly took his eye, and the 8th finally brought him to his knees. But by then, Kira had escaped, and she was sprinting down the street, and her small form disappeared into the darkness. Daniel collapsed face first onto the wet concrete, and his vision blurred as blood pooled around him, and the Calirian youths stood over him, breathing hard and looking down at the stupid human who had dared to challenge them, and one of them raised the blade for a final strike. But it never fell. A brilliant blue light flooded the alley, and the Calirians stumbled back and shielded their eyes, and through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, Daniel saw figures descending from above, and they moved with lethal precision, and within seconds the Calirian youths were disarmed and restrained, and a voice spoke in accented English. She said he saved a child of the Sylvani and he took 8 strikes to do it. Another voice responded with something Daniel could not understand, and then strong hands lifted him, and he felt the sensation of weightlessness before everything went black. Daniel woke 3 days later in a bed that was far too comfortable to be real, and the ceiling above him glowed with soft amber light and his body ached. But the pain was distant and muted as though wrapped in layers of cotton. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, but a hand gently pressed him back down, and a woman appeared in his field of vision, and she had the same silver skin as Kira, but she was taller, and her eyes held the weight of years and authority. She spoke in perfect English, and her voice was like wind chimes, and she told him that he was in a Sylvani medical facility, hidden beneath the city, and that he had been brought there by the resistance and a network of Sylvani who had been secretly fighting against their Calirian masters for decades. Daniel asked about Kira, and the woman smiled and told him the child was safe, and that she had led the resistance to him, and that his actions had done something no Sylvani had seen in 2 generations, and they had inspired hope over. The next week, as Daniel recovered, he learned the truth about the Sylvani, and they were not weak and they were not helpless, and they had been quietly gathering strength and waiting for the right moment to strike back against the Calirians, and his willingness to die for one of their children had proven something they had long suspected, that humans were allies worth fighting alongside. The woman who had first spoken to him introduced herself as Lyra, and she was a commander in the resistance, and she explained that the Sylvani had been studying humanity since the invasion began, and they had watched how humans responded to oppression, and how they protected each other, and how they refused to break even under the worst conditions. She told Daniel that the resistance wanted to propose an alliance, and that if humanity would stand with them, they would share their technology and their knowledge, and together they would drive the Calirians from Earth. Daniel asked why they needed him, and Lyra's expression grew serious, and she explained that the Sylvani people needed a symbol, and they needed proof that humans would risk everything for those who could not fight for themselves. And Daniel had become that proof. When he was finally strong enough to walk, Lyra brought him to a hidden chamber deep beneath the facility, and there he found Kira waiting with dozens of other Sylvani children. And when she saw him, her face lit up, and she ran to him, and threw her small arms around his waist. Through a translator device, Kira told him that she had been so scared, and that she thought he was dead, and that she had never met anyone like him. And Daniel knelt down and told her that she was worth every scar and every moment of pain. The room erupted in a strange humming sound, and Lyra explained that it was the Sylvani way of showing respect and gratitude. 2 weeks after Daniel woke in that medical facility, he stood before a gathering of human resistance leaders in an abandoned subway station, and beside him stood Lyra and a delegation of Sylvani warriors. And they wore armor that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid mercury, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Daniel told the humans everything, and he told them about the Sylvani's strength and their technology and their willingness to fight, and he told them about Kira and about the choice he had made in that alley and about the choice they all faced. Now some were skeptical, and some were afraid, but one woman named Claire stood and spoke, and she said that if Daniel was willing to take 8 stabs for a child he had never met, then maybe it was time for humanity to prove that such courage was not an exception but a rule. The vote was unanimous. Within a month, the combined human and Sylvani resistance began their campaign against the Calirian occupation, and they struck fast and hard, using the Sylvani's advanced technology and humanity's unpredictable tactics. And the Calirians, who had expected broken slaves, found themselves facing warriors who refused to kneel. Daniel fought alongside Lyra and her soldiers, and he learned to use Sylvani weapons and to move like they moved. And every time he saw Kira in the underground shelters where the children were kept safe, he was reminded of why he fought. The war lasted 6 months, and it ended when the Calirian command ship was destroyed by a joint strike force.